I'm Christine, I'm your MC for today, but before I begin, I'd like to hand over to Tanya from Adobe.
By acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are gathered here today, the Gadigal peoples of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge their continued connection to the lands, water and community and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Thank you.
Part of our graduate program, so fantastic to be up here today. So welcome, my name is Christine Rodriguez. I am the co-managing director of Girls in Tech Australia. And for those that do recognise me, I also work at Adobe as a Strategic Alliances Manager for APAC. Girls in Tech is a not-for-profit, and we were founded in 2007 in the US by a woman called Adriana Gascoigne. We're now large enough to be captured in 50 cities globally, and we have about 70,000 members. In Australia alone, we've been operating since 2016, and we've just pushed over 12,000 members across our channels. We're all about empowering, educating, and enabling women to be the best that they can be within the tech industry. We're a community-based organisation, so we're all volunteers. I'm a volunteer. Karen, who's also on our board, is a volunteer. And we have a number of women and girls from many stages of their career who help us put on events like this. We wouldn't be here without our community and our corporate sponsors who actually help us bring these events to life. And we do things like panels, hackathons. We have a massive conference in May. And on that note, I'd like to welcome a big thank you to Adobe for having us here to be able to partner with them to bring this event for you today. On that note, I'd like to hand over to Clarissa, who is our D&I lead for Adobe, to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. As Christine has shared, I'm Clarissa Annalyn and I lead diversity and inclusion programs here at Adobe in the APAC and Japan region. And thank you, Tanya, for acknowledging country. And I also want to pay my respects to the Gadigal peoples and their elders for this beautiful space and this gathering that we are here today over here in Darling Park, and the continuing connection to the waters here in Cockle Bay Wharf. And that spirit that we all come together here at Adobe to come and be as creative and innovative as possible. So a couple of weeks ago, someone asked me, why do we acknowledge country? And I know that all of us are probably on some journey in that spectrum of acknowledging country. And 2 days ago, I just came out of a silent meditation retreat. And it was 10 days, and some of you at the back will be like, Flo at a meditation retreat and silent. Yeah, right. That's just impossible for her to be quiet for an hour. But one of the things I really wanted to cultivate, apart from many other things around being more mindful, was to be more intentional and purposeful around my words. We know that our words can carry our emotions, our passions, what we like and what we don't like. But in regards to our First Nations peoples, in lieu of a treaty, an acknowledgement of country is the start of our sign for compassion and respect. And so I ideally welcome any First Nations people in this room and really want to acknowledge the elders past and present. And I'm really proud to say that Adobe has been on a journey over the last 2 years in recognising our contribution to a brighter future for our First Nations peoples. And in a couple of weeks, we will be celebrating the launch of our first Reconciliation Action Plan. And it has been a passion and a body of work that a lot of the people in this room across our offices in Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra that have contributed to building a future with our First Nations peoples, and something I'm immensely proud of. So happy to talk to you about one of my passion projects in diversity and inclusion during the morning tea. But my role here today is to bring up someone who has just started at Adobe, but for me, her reputation precedes her. I was incredibly excited to see her, to hear that she was joining Adobe. I'd heard her speak in a couple of Women in Tech events. I know that IBM had a solid reconciliation action plan, and just wanted to read out just some things about Katrina before she joins me on stage. So she joined us a couple of months ago, and she's had over 30 years of experience in the global tech sector. She's held leadership roles in ANZ, across our region, in China and also in the US. Throughout her career, Katrina has been a strong champion for careers and development. She has served on the TAFE New South Wales Advisory Board. She's an ambassador for New South Wales Careers. In her previous two roles in IBM, spent 13 years there, and she's achieved great success in growing IBM SaaS businesses and really transforming operations across the organization's ecosystems. Her passion for culture, diversity and inclusion in high-performing teams really saw her recognised last year as CEO of the Year in the Australian LGBTQI Awards. So I'm thrilled that she's here to come and join us for a Girls in Tech event. So I want to welcome to the stage Katrina Crawford.
Hello.
Welcome. Is this your first Girls in Tech event?
I think it's certainly my first Girls in Tech event in person, and I think that counts. I think I've joined one online before, but it's so good to see everyone in person, and I think it just gives us a chance to, despite the fact that we've practiced so much now virtually, recognise that some of the discussions we have, especially around diversity, inclusion, they're a lot easier to have when you're face-to-face with people. Yeah.
I'm all for that, totally. So Katrina, you joined in September, and it was smack bang in the middle of Adobe for a Week, which, for those of you who don't know, Adobe for a Week is our marquee diversity and inclusion event for our employees globally to just stop and really acknowledge the diversity within our organisation, to celebrate everyone's uniqueness and to empower our employees to be better allies to make change in our workplace and in the communities in which we operate. I want to know, what has been your early impressions of D&I at Adobe, the culture, and with what you bring to this role, where do you want to take it further so we can keep going and raise the flag?
Well, look, first of all, I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted to join Adobe is because of the reputation it has and the culture and the way it works, the way it showed up. And I think diversity and inclusion is a critical part of that. I mean, diversity to me is really simple. It's just your numbers. It's a fact. And, like everywhere, we have more work to go. And so there's key areas, and I know we're so lucky. You just heard that introduction. We are so lucky to have an incredible, not just you, but also team that works across continuing this. But the part that really matters to me is the inclusion part, because inclusion is about how you feel. It's about the experience you have that makes you feel, I belong here, I can really contribute, and people recognise me for being me. I'm not trying to be somebody else. And I think and I did join the last week of September, right in the middle of that Adobe for a Week, and it was just really lovely to hear the celebration of the stories. And I say celebration because that's how it felt. It didn't feel like we're trying to showcase or we're trying to explore. It was like, it was celebrating the fact that this diversity brings such immense culture and value and differences with it. And it was something that we think is really important. So I thought it was really powerful, and some of the stories were quite incredible. In terms of, you asked about 4 questions at the beginning. I'm trying to remember. Well, the last part was, where do I want to lean in? I mean, look, I continue to, I think, see opportunity to, here, first up is absolutely around the Indigenous focus that we have. And for me, I've always used the things that I spend time on around D&I as my chance to learn. And it's certainly one that I acknowledge I've got a lot to learn in. And I'm really excited about where we are with the RAP coming up, or the Reconciliation Action Plan, but actually the learning journey that we're all on. So I think that for me, in the short term, at least, is really important. But, that does not mean that the part that I think I've always been pretty passionate about, which is that, technology offers incredible careers for people. I feel really privileged that I've had an amazing career
And I think it's a great industry for people across the board. And certainly we need more women, we need more diversity. So I'm not going to stop on that either. But first up.
I love that. Thank you. And it's so true. I think even me as a diversity inclusion practitioner, I'm learning more every day, and it's a muscle that we need to build. We need to put those reps in, acknowledging country, or just being, trying to challenge your own biases. And I love that after, 30 years in the industry, you're still learning and growing and developing that side of you. I want to talk about your experience here as a woman in tech and a leader in tech. How has diversity really or more inclusive mindset supported you in that place? And what can we do more? What do you want to see more from everyone in this room?
Yeah, and I thought, and I think I told this story actually with some Adobe people recently. So apologies if you're hearing it again. But I suppose as I've thought about that idea of what inclusion means, I've thought back to, well, what empowered me? And I still remember when I was first starting in our business and I was invited to a round table discussion with our general manager, at which point I went to my manager, oh my God, have I done something wrong? I said, no, this, we do this regularly. We just have these discussions. And of course, you turn up and there was me and one other woman. I can assure you, I remember that pretty clearly. And there was a big group. It felt like a very big group of mainly, therefore, guys, and mainly, therefore, older, because I was my first year working. And I still remember this discussion because it was about a time we were moving buildings and moving location. And the general manager said, I want to just make sure that we're, hearing from everybody and that we're hearing the different viewpoints. And he ran the meeting, and there was lots, I can assure you, of views from a number of people. Now, I went into that meeting, if you reflect on it now, probably going, my job is to kind of sit and listen in the corner because, I'm new. I'm not sure I really have that right to have a view yet. And with that, halfway through the meeting, and there was plenty of, the general manager turned around and he said, and he turned to me and said, look, Katrina, just want to let you know, I know you'll have an important view here too, and I'll be coming back to you in a minute, and I want to hear from you too. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, first, I have no idea what I said, and I kind of panicked a bit, but I'm sure I did. But what I remember still is that feeling of like, wow, what I have, my thoughts here are actually valued. And so from that time, I've always thought, that's how I want to make people feel that work in my business. That you have the right, that we want to hear. Doesn't mean you always get your way, but what you have to say does count and get considered. And so to me, that's a lot of, what I want to continue to do and think about as a leader. Am I doing that? Sometimes you don't do it very well. You just got to keep practicing and learning.
I think that's extremely powerful. I mean, in my journey, in my own career, Katrina, I do so much around beating imposter syndrome and trying to bring my full self. But it's truly really more empowered and impactful when someone opens doors for you, when someone brings you into conversation that is at a point of a privilege. And it's just those things that we need to all in throughout the journeys of a career pay forward to those who are coming up as well, right?
Yeah, and I think certainly I then have had a lot of my career working across Asia, and it's a range of different cultures, and the way people interact and will participate varies a lot, and you just have to, keep working on how you get everyone to engage. And then I think to your point, as a woman in tech, in terms of my career and key milestones, I mean, I do think as well, a lot of it was whether it's imposter syndrome, not sure, but you do have times where you go, I'm not sure I can do that. And I think that's also where, building a network, whether it's, peers, mentors, sponsors, I mean, there's a whole range of different people, but building a network is actually really important, because what I've found at many points in my career, the most important thing is for someone to turn around and go, what are you thinking? Why do you think that? Where did that come from? Because one of the things that I found I especially did early in my career was often go, well, almost think through so many things that could happen in my head that I'd almost got to the point that I assumed something would happen that we didn't really know would happen. And I had that experience when I was working here in Australia, and I was asked if I wanted to move back to New Zealand and take on a country general manager role. And at the time I had 2 toddlers, and and days were just hectic and manic, as most toddlers know. Manic. And our head office was in Wellington, and I only had family and support in Auckland and here in Sydney, but in Auckland. And I was point of like, oh my gosh, I don't think I could make it work if I, living in Wellington would never work. And I talked to myself to this point that I sat down with a person who was a fantastic mentor and said, well, what do you think? Where are you at? And she goes, and she, I talked through it, said, I'm just not sure I could, do this in Wellington, blah, blah, kids, blah, blah. And she said, so did they tell you it has to be in Wellington? I went, no. No, good point. Then she said, well, did you ask? And then you're going, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? I kind of talked myself into it, and I needed that person from the outside to go, no, you don't get it. They wouldn't have asked you if they didn't, see there was a value you're going to bring. And part of the value is when, you can do your job well. So be open about what you need to do your job well. So I went back and said, look, really, really interested. It's really exciting, but I think because of my family right now, I'd need to live in Auckland rather than Wellington. And my manager said, or the general manager here at the time said, okay, but is that okay for the business too? Do you think it would work? Yes, I think it would work. Otherwise, I wouldn't have suggested it. And he went, good, okay. And I was like, what was these 3 nights of not sleeping? And so that whole piece of creating your own barriers, or not continuing to think of everything you can do, and be willing to speak up about the things that you might need in the environment to really do well, I think is really important, and a big learning. And I've seen it repeated through my career. So even though you make those mistakes or you have those experiences, they still keep coming up. And so that's why I think that external lens is so important.
I love that, especially as, no woman or man is an island, and you really do need your own personal board to really shine that mirror up to you and to test you as well. And I just thought, I totally resonate with that, with your story. My last question is, Katrina, you've been in the industry for 30 years. You've seen the business, the tech industry, and the people really evolve and change. And for us, what is your advice for all of us to future-proof ourselves for this coming change? We've got digital skill shortages coming up in the future, the more tech coming, complex customer needs. What do we need to nurture and instill and grow today for the future?
Yeah, look, I think for me, it's always been about curiosity and a willingness to continue to learn. And I think it's easy to go, well, hold it, I'm sure many of us get given, long lists of things we could go and learn technically or about new products. But it's not just about business always. It's even just new things that you learn. And I've really learned so much through some of the diversity and inclusion things I've done. And I've, like I said, I'm really interested to learn about the culture. And then you learn about stories of how people do things differently, and that learning and that curiosity and learning alongside, around our industry. I think the two are both really important together. So don't let yourself feel like it means I have to go and try and do a master's, or, find there's plenty of in industry continual opportunity you can look to. But I think it's about trying to embrace continuing to learn broadly. I think that's a really important part of being in this industry. The other thing I've said, and I absolutely have seen throughout my career, is the opportunity that exists in this industry that doesn't exist in some slower moving industries, and that change creates opportunity. And early in my career, I had an opportunity to jump in and start working a lot in data, and certainly distributed data and data intelligence and data analytics was kind of new in a lot of areas. And so I had this opportunity to go and, learn and lead a business in that area and set some of that up. And so I went, oh, that's kind of cool, and jumped in and did it. In hindsight, I realized the opportunity it gave me was massive, because it didn't actually take very long before I knew more than most people. And you didn't actually need to know a lot to be an expert. You know, when you're in early, you don't need to know a lot to be an expert. And if you keep learning, you sort of stay ahead. When you jump into something that, you know, there's 20 years of lots of skills and experience in, it will take you a lot longer to be seen as that expert. And I think this industry, it absolutely favours people who like change, who get energised by it, who have that curiosity and want to keep learning. But when you have that chance to jump into new things, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, what age you are or how much experience you've got, or whatever, you can cross over into new areas and become an expert. And that's, I think, a really interesting and pretty cool part of our industry. And I just challenge you to keep thinking about, what can I do that's going to keep me in that zone. I have to say, I wasn't that great a number of years ago. I wasn't that great in social media and learning that. And when I found out my dad had more Twitter followers than me, I got quite concerned. And then I thought, I really have to know something more about this. So, you know, sometimes it's also finding those people that kind of, you know, challenge you a bit too, but it was particularly funny. I'm still not that good on Twitter, so.
Following your dad.
It was just so fun. It was like, oh my God, what's he doing?
Thank you so much, Katrina. Really excited to have you at Adobe, and so glad that you were able to speak at this Girls in Tech event.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see you all.
Okay, so now for the fun. That was really great, actually. I haven't heard any of your stories. I wasn't here during Adobe for all week. I was off, so first time for me. It is all about storytelling, so I will invite our panelists up to the stage while they get ready. Just a couple of things. This session is actually being recorded because we're actually going to package it up and send it out to our community within Girls in Tech. So it will go to 12,000 odd individuals. So just a note to say how awesome everyone's outfits are, because the mic will pick up in the room. Also, you know, feel free to take photos, you know, put on your LinkedIn, put on your Instagram, hashtag the future for all, you know, talk about it. It's all about, you know, extending and sort of, you know, talking about the movement and why we're here today. So, you know, the more we can amplify, the more we can do great things like this. And if the first two sessions weren't enough, you know, it is all about diversity. It's not just about women in tech. It is about, you know, inclusion and diversity across all sort of channels. So the more we can drive awareness, the better. So thank you, panelists. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves today instead of me actually introducing you. So talking about the future, it's all about, you know, storytelling and where we've come from. We're not futurists. We're not necessarily going to come and tell you what's going to come next, but I think it was a really good opportunity for me to meet with all the panelists virtually and hear a little bit about their careers. One thing I did pick up when I talked to people in tech is, you know, a lot of us here didn't decide to be in tech. The things that we do today weren't invented when we went to uni or at school or things like that. So what I'm going to get you guys to do is introduce yourselves, what your name, where you're from, what you do now, and, you know, possibly what was your first job. So for me, my first job was, I don't know if you guys remember, if you go into a shopping centre at Christmas time, there's people painting the names on the Christmas decorations with glitter. That was me. Sounds fun until glitter is in your hair, your eyes, your sandwiches, your car for about 6 months thereafter. So not necessarily a tech career, but very creative. And I really loved and enjoyed that. So who's got the mic? Victoria, you've got the mic. Did you want to kick off?
I'm Victoria Deutsch. I'm the Executive General Manager of Customer at a company called InvoCare. My first job was at Katie's, which is, selling clothes. Katie's.
It's much better than mine. My name is Ramak. Hi, everyone. I am the VP for Staffbase, a software as a service vendor. My first job it's actually super embarrassing. But you know those people that go down the aisles and they wear costumes? I used to be a Pringles person. And then having to take it off? Yeah, that's what I did. Yeah. Please don't tell anyone.
I'm Dina Michelle. So I'm from Deloitte. I'm a director there in Deloitte Digital. And my first casual job was similar, working in a fashion outlet called Edgar's in South Africa. My first real job was as a high school teacher, teaching English and drama.
Thank you. And my name's Scott. I just want to say, actually, in a room full of data personalisation experts, you really pioneered it, personalising Christmas decorations, personalisation pioneer. My first job, I worked at Woolworths, stacking shelves, minimum wage, stacking through the night. I was working at the same Woolworths in Campbelltown that my grandmother worked in her entire career, so she thought that was wonderful. It was the worst job I ever had, but I now work for Adobe Digital Strategy Group. According to my grandmother, I went off the rails somewhere and ended up in the wrong crowd and here.
So we all start somewhere, so that gives us some good context. I'll get you to pass the mic back down to Victoria. My first question. So we often say tech careers aren't planned, like we just demonstrated. They're not linear. You kind of start, you go here, there, and everywhere. As Katrina said, it's all about change and being uncomfortable with that change. And the next thing you might do just might not be around yet. So, Victoria, you worked across a number of industries. I don't want to be a spoiler, but I did want you to walk us through some of those industries and where you are today.
Great, thank you. I definitely don't think careers are linear, and I also don't think that they're ladders. I think the whole idea of a ladder is erroneous. Somebody described my career recently as being boundary crossing, which I really like the idea of, and I think boundary crossing skills are really important to cultivate. I started my career working at News Corp, and I worked in 3 tech startups. So I worked at Aussie Mail, which was the first ISP in Australia. I set up a .com back when it was cool to set up a .com, just ages me now, but I set up a company called Chaos Music, which was funded by the Turnbulls. And then I also worked in a tech startup of a roll-up of digital ad agencies. However, I've also worked for lots of kind of really traditional ASX 100 companies. So I led marketing and digital at David Jones. I led marketing and digital at a company called Event that owns QT Hotels, Threadbow and Event Cinemas. I spent 5 years of my career at Sydney Opera House leading marketing and digital there. And now I work in the funeral industry for a company called InvoCare, whose purpose is all around helping Australian families when they need us most, and really working with families to honour life and celebrate memories. It's a really important role in society. So yeah, I've done a lot of kind of boundary crossing, a lot of different things, and I always give kind of 2 pieces of advice. One is think 2 chess moves ahead, but at the same time, really make sure you walk through the doors that open up for you, because I didn't know what was coming, but for every opportunity I've taken, I've thought about, well, if I take this opportunity, kind of what will come next. And when we were preparing for this, I talked a lot about in my career, what's happened is I've done a lot of kind of volunteering in that I've put my hand up for things when no one else has wanted to run them, especially in big companies where a project will come up. And so that I really encourage that, putting your hand up. When I came into InvoCare, I had digital, but I didn't have the call centres, and I could see that somebody needed to take over the call centres because these call centres are like lifeline. People are ringing saying, I've just lost my aunt and I'm devastated. And I was like, well, I'm not going to get paid anymore to do it, but somebody needs to take this on. And so I think this idea of volunteering is really important. And my last comment before I hand back the mic is, I guess, in terms of my career, what really has mattered to me is working in and creating great cultures. They say culture eats strategy for breakfast every day, and I think that's never more so than in this kind of post-pandemic world. So what I think the future leaders need to be able to do is create great cultures. And so I'm really encouraging of people to think about how they create culture in their teams.
Fantastic, well said. Passing on to Dina to start. So again, talking about these careers not being linear and, kind of like you said, crossing boundaries, you've actually started your career in creative and marketing, and then you transitioned into tech. And what you said to me, I think it was really beautiful. It was like the pendulum eventually swung and it kind of landed on a balance between the two. So could you maybe walk us through your early career as well and, how you found your niche?
Of course, going back a while. So
Absolutely. I started in back then sort of traditional agencies, so brand and creative. Hear me? Sorry, brand and creative agencies. So I worked for J. Walter Thompson, multinational clients, TV ads, lots of TV ads, lots of radio ads. And then we started moving into the world of digital. But back then, digital was really matching luggage. It was, copy the print out and put it on a banner and make it digital. So when I moved to Australia in 2010, I moved with a company called, back then it was Cummins Nacho. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it, but it was the first time that a technology agency, Sapient, bought a traditional agency called Cummins Nacho at the time. So in that year, we had 3 name changes from Cummins to Cummins Nacho to Sapient Nacho, which is now Sapient and part of the Publicis Group. So Sapient was a very technology-led company. And as I say, Nacho, or Cummins Nacho was really quite traditional. So yes, so we did sort of have a lot of change, a lot of cultural change over the course of a year. And then we did sort of settle a little bit as we started to understand our proposition in the market. And after that experience, I quite like what Katrina was saying, got to find those opportunities. So I really enjoyed the space of technology and digital, and went on to work for a social company or agency, website company, a data company, really to try and understand some of those verticals. And where I am today at Deloitte, we really have a look at sort of all of the aspects of creative technology to digital, customer experience, UX design, and the power is in how all of those come together and work synergistically.
Now, Scott, over to you, our ally on the panel. Thank you for joining us. So you work at Adobe now. You also worked at Adobe before and left and started your own business. So can you give us a little bit of insight into that part of your career and what you did in that portion?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been called an Adobe boomerang, as in you can't get rid of me. Keep coming back. I left Adobe to found an agency in 2014. I suppose the relevance to sort of, pertinent parts of this conversation, it was a true startup. Started with 2 founders. We went through rapid growth periods of hiring. In a pretty short term, in about 12, 18 months, we're about 30 people. And we're on our way to becoming one of the most specialized, most awarded, and largest partners in Asia Pacific for Adobe. And a lot of people asked from time to time throughout that journey, what was that sort of secret sauce? And really it was the people, and largely probably the hiring process to find the best people. We weren't making shoes. We weren't. Our services were our people. And so the hiring process and finding the best people in market, it was really two things that we did. We had a pretty standard qualitative hiring process where we would, panel interviews, manager interviews, etc. But we also had a qualitative component where we would run a pretty hefty psychometric testing of our people. It was interesting when we started to hit critical masses around 30, 40, 50 people. Every now and again, you'd stop and you'd sort of take stock of what your sort of team mix looked like. And as we reached, throughout that journey, we reached 70 people. We got to about 100 people. And looking back, we had an incredibly diverse range of people and a very balanced mix. And I think really what that told me is if you do have a truly unbiased hiring process, you do end up with the best of the best, and you organically end up with a mix of diversity. And one of the sort of final, one of the first things we implemented actually, which at the time I thought was relatively cliche, but we came up with this overarching mantra that whoever we hired had to have a good heart and a good mind. And we would put people through this pretty intensive hiring process. But even at the end of it, you'd have this panel discussion, and we'd say, did that person have a good heart, good mind? And that was sort of, the benchmark test. And I think that's truly what made it sort of, unique. Yeah.
I really love that, this whole great hearts, great minds. We talked about that at length. I grilled Scott intensively on this hiring process, and it's almost like you do not have any unconscious bias in your being. And everyone, you said to me that you skewed 53% odd, like ish, female to male in those days. And I think that's an amazing achievement without a formal policy to actually have achieved that. So congratulations. I think it's a great example to be setting. Now I'm going to have to pass the mic all the way down to Ramak. So, okay, we're all friends here. Okay, so a little bit different. Unlike most of us, you actually started your career in tech. You know, we don't find
Go figure.
So maybe tell us about that career. I think you started that as a grad.
Yes. So similar. I was part of a graduate program for Fujitsu. So one of, I think, 200 graduates back then. The programs were much bigger. And yeah, out of those 200, there was literally 3 women as part of that program. And yeah, it was very different days to now. But I remember at that time, as a graduate, you're applying, you know, to all the programs, and I'd get calls and I'd forget which one I'd applied for, and I was like, is this sales or marketing? I'd do the whole interview and I'd realize it's a marketing role. And but yeah, so I started Fujitsu, and I remember back in those days, Fujitsu had, we were in North Ryde, and basically I was the only female on the whole floor, like no other women. So it was interesting. And back then, you know, internet security wasn't that great. So you'd walk past, you know, kind of people on their laptops or their desktops, and you'd see things that you probably shouldn't be seeing, which is a different world as today. But then I moved on. I was very fortunate in my career. I actually had a male mentor that helped really shape the way that I work, the way that I think. And as a graduate, he kind of took me under his wing, and he then moved on to a board of a company called NetScreen, which was at the time is smaller, and moved me as a channel manager over there at the age of 21, which was very cool for me. And literally 2 months into that role, we were acquired by Juniper Networks, which is a large routing and security company. So I, you know, whilst I I studied business and marketing and, you know, kind of did the business route, I wanted to get into IT. I knew it was a good area. I knew that there was a lot of, you know, the changes and innovations. So I definitely wanted to get into that space, and I've been doing that over the last 20 years.
I think it's a nice touch on. You said you had a male mentor.
Yeah.
Allyship, sponsorship, cheerleaders, whatever you like to call it. I think it's a good starting point from, you know, what Katrina said, what Victoria. Everyone sort of had this experience where someone sort of helped them, you know, in their career. I'm going to pass over to Scott on this theme of allyship, being our representative on the panel, not to single you out. But I wanted to sort of dive into this concept of allyship, and also as a leader, you know, can you remember a time when, you know, you had to advocate for someone or be an ally to someone sort of within your arena?
Yeah, it's probably a couple of things, but something that came up just before, I think, and it's very, very timely. I think, you know, walking into a room of a male-dominated room to have a meeting, it is important to make sure everybody in that room has a voice and has opportunity to, I think Katrina touched on this, to have their voice heard. And I think that's even more, just that basic cadence is even more important now when you're on Teams, having the opportunity to sort of, you know, pass the mic in Teams. Otherwise, you know, you do quite often end up with, you know, somebody's found a way to suck the air out of a digital, you know, Teams environment. But, you know, I think the other thing that comes to mind, at one point I had a team of about 140 people, and I had access to one of those, you know, spreadsheets where you're listing everybody's job, their title, and their remuneration. And I decided just to do a really quick and dirty sort of gender pay gap analysis with that spreadsheet. So went through, had a look at an aggregate, and I think it was about 60% or 63% odds skewed towards males in terms of that gender pay gap. So I dug into the data a little bit more, and I realised there was about 8 or 9 more senior team members that were being paid significantly more than sort of the average. So I excluded those, and then the sort of the norm, that normalised a bit, and it got more to sort of that, closer to that 50-50 balance. But so when I looked at that leadership of 8 or 9 people, though, of course, it was a pretty heavily skewed male team. So that told me there was sort of a secondary issue within that gender pay gap issue. And we were in technology, so it is a pretty heavily dominated male thing. But I wanted to take some immediate action on that. So I looked at the most tenured and most experienced females we have within the business, and had an opportunity to move their salary up to sort of, the top of that pay range or above, and just immediately start to skew that. And then I just sort of flagged this broader issue of the leadership imbalance that we had with the appropriate HR business teams, etc., to take a longer term action on that.
That's really interesting. I read a report last week. It was like there is still a gender pay gap, but there isn't a performance gap. So it's around, we still get these great people coming up. It's just being able to recognize and balance that out as an organization. Some are really good at it and some are still getting there. And that's why we all need to get in the room today and sort of champion that voice for those that haven't actually sat down and dug into the numbers. So continuing on with the allyship, I'm going to keep it with you for just a moment. You did actually tell me a story around, the way that you would sort of mentor and ally women in your business as well, some not also in your leadership team, but around that. Can you give us an example? I think you mentioned a lady who was, not having that voice in a room, not being able to get that attention when she conducted meetings. Can you dive into a little bit of that story? I really liked your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sort of individual I was referring to in that conversation, she was fresh out of college, possibly first job, I think, and new to Australia as well, out of the States. And she just had a way of presenting herself, which was not, I guess, not professional in a sort of a corporate environment. So she was extremely capable, very clever, very good at what she did, but she would almost undersell herself in just the way that she came across to the senior stakeholders and professional corporate people that she'd be dealing with. And it became an ongoing issue. Ongoing issue, but occasionally it got flagged from customers themselves. And she really was just underselling her capability and just the way that she presented. Yeah. Solve for that ultimately was she reported to an incredibly strong, capable female leader who was almost the inverse, but also incredibly capable. So having her mentor the new and the new sort of person in the business, and learn from her in the way she commanded the room and just carried herself, etc., was the ultimate solve. So it was finding the right mentor for the issue. Yeah.
And I think maybe some people in their head, in the room, and not in their heads around, how many times have you maybe made yourself a little bit sound a bit ditzy in a room because you think that's going to be the persona that's going to be the most well received, and it happens when you're the only female or possibly the minority in the room. So it's just commanding that audience, holding your voice, and finding the right mentor that can sort of call you out on that early on in your career. I thought that was really important. Switching gears, keeping in this mentorship, allyship sort of theme, but over to Dina. You described for me the way that Deloitte actually has a partnership matrix instead of this hierarchical, no ladders, as to so to speak. So can you give us a little bit of insight into how that works and how your mentoring and allyship plays into that?
Yeah, with pleasure. So, as you said, Deloitte is actually based on the premise of a partnership. So instead of managers, our team have project coaches as well as career coaches. So I'm assigned a number of team members that I'm both a project coach for or a career coach for, and the opportunity is to meet with them on a regular basis and to do a lot of active listening, understand some of their concerns, their challenges, and really work alongside them to help them reach their goals and their objectives. We also encourage our teams to set their own goals, their own KPIs, so that they can track their own performance and see how they're doing, and really take control of where they want to learn, where they want to grow, how they want to succeed, which I think is a really interesting system. We also, as coaches, get a lot of internal training, so that we know how to approach a coachee, how to ensure that we're supportive in our roles. And when it comes to review time, which is twice a year, the broader team also is invited, who's worked alongside that team member, to give a perspective and to give feedback with a real focus on how to support them and how to grow them and develop them, which I think again, is a really lovely culture, because that goes back to a culture of support, looking for ways to actually promote people, make sure that we're giving them the right guidance in their careers to succeed.
Fantastic. So everybody's sort of taking on that onus for leadership, and then others actually taking responsibility for their career, their KPIs, working together. It takes a village. They always say that. It takes a village. Now, passing on to Victoria, we chatted a little bit around, preparing yourself for this leadership. So, whether it's a matrix model or you're actually taking a step up. And you mentioned to me about, being leaders, you have to sort of emulate that leadership throughout your career. So can you give me some examples where you might have done this or where you've seen it done really well?
So I think the idea that we're all leaders always and at all times, we're leaders in our families, we're leaders in our community, and whether you lead a team or you don't lead a team, you are a leader. So how are you demonstrating implicit leadership as opposed to explicit leadership? How are you getting out of your own swim lane and actually helping deliver on the enterprise strategic priorities? How are you bringing people along on the team? How are you being part of a culture? How are you being a volunteer? I think all of those things really ladder up to what leadership looks like, and we should all be kind of thinking about that all the time, because they're, in my experience, they're the people that get promoted. It's the people that show this tenacity, this leaning in, this team spirit, this desire not to just be, is that horrible term, a single contributor that, often you hear people in culture team, that person's just a single contributor. I hate that term because we're all part of a team. And so that would, that's my first piece of advice. And absolutely in my journey, I've worked a lot with, I've been lucky to work with executive coaches and stuff, but the kind of kernel in that is learning to be really self-aware, because the key to leadership is self-awareness, because we're all great when we're in a great situation. Where our flaws show up is when we're stressed and life is hard. So understanding what your weaknesses are. I become very perfectionistic. I push myself too hard. I'm overambitious, and then that plays out in a way that can be really stressful for people around me. And so I've really learned. I have a former EA in the room, brilliant Liv, who now works for Adobe. So she might roll her eyes at me, but I've really learned that being a leader, this idea that you have to manage your own well-being, and that means I'm really disciplined. I eat well, I sleep well. I'll let myself do 2 or 3 days where I push myself too hard, and then I rein it in, because you can't be a leader if you've got nothing left in the tank. I take absolute responsibility for my own education, and I think we've been talking about this idea of learning and continuous learning. I've done a whole stack of short courses recently because I just love learning. So I think this idea of kind of own your own well-being, step up and volunteer, keep on learning. And I think the other thing is around saying thank you and saying sorry. They're great qualities of leaders. You get it wrong, say sorry. Someone does something for you, say thank you. But they're sometimes overlooked in corporate worlds, I think. Just basic, thank you and sorry make a big difference.
Courtesy. And females have this tendency to overexert themselves. There are some people that are experts in just female burnout. Sean Hall's a great one if you follow him on LinkedIn. So there's a lot of stats around, why women tend to do this. It does skew towards that.
There's a great book called Rushing Women's Syndrome by Dr. Libby Weaver. I highly recommend as well, just on that issue.
And get your phones out and take notes. I'm not going to get in trouble. Swinging back over to Ramak. So we're talking about leadership. We're talking about emulating leadership. And, sometimes it doesn't come as easy as it sounds. Like, we burn out, we, become perfectionists, all these things that you've mentioned. So we're going to go into the juicy one that everybody loves to hear about, which is imposter syndrome. Everyone nods their head. Everyone thinks, do I have this? Have I had this? No, I haven't. That's all, what are we doing with this? Can you share, a little bit about when this has crept in for you in your career? What it felt like, and maybe some practical advice on how you experienced and overcome that.
Yeah. And I think Katrina also touched on this. I don't think there's a person on the planet that's, done a new thing and not felt the imposter syndrome, right? And I think it's really highlighted for women because, we're doing a lot of new things. We're breaking a lot of new grounds, especially as leaders, right? So I feel this pretty much in every new role that I go in. I would say right before I start, I think, oh my God, why have they selected me to do this? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. But once I get in, it probably takes me a couple of weeks and I'm like, I got this, right? I think it's definitely like what you were referring to. It's all in your mind. It really is being self-aware, understanding, like what Katrina was saying, what are the thoughts that are occurring in your head? A lot of leadership, anything to do with life, is knowing yourself, right? Knowing what are those constant thoughts that are blocking you. And I think it's being aware of that, and then having a mentor, having someone to talk it through, to be able to rationalize, because a lot of our fears are actually not real. If you guys like podcasts, I really recommend The Diary of a CEO. I listen to it religiously, Steve Bartlett. And there's one podcast, and I can't remember who he was talking to, but it was, some amazing leader. And he said, well, do you feel the imposter syndrome? And it was a gentleman, and he turned around and he said, well, every time I do something new, I feel it because it's challenging me. It's putting me in a position where I've never done something before. So what I say to myself is, hey, this is just something new, right? It's going to feel uncomfortable. I'm going to feel like this is not me, right? But then I talk myself through that, and then I go through it anyway. And that's really helped me, particularly I've started my career, 21, being in around that boardroom table, being the youngest, being the only female, getting GM positions, getting VP positions, right? Like you get that feeling of, oh, wow, right? Like, do I have a say? Can I do this? Can I lead a team of 80 people? Can I lead a team of 100 people? But it's no different to leading a team of 3 people or 4 people, right? Because it's about the people. It's about your connection. But it also starts with the connection with yourself. If you don't have that, then people will see through that very quickly. It's very hard to fake.
Not that you can't do it, you've just never done it before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is
you can do anything, right? It's at the end of the day, you will learn through it as long as you can be patient with yourself. I think that's really important, and ask for help, right? I think that's another thing that women and men, and I'm not generalizing, we don't ask enough for help. I think people are willing to help. In sales, we say to our customers, I'd really love you to help me understand, and they're willing to help you. With your teams, I think it becomes a vulnerability of, oh, I can't ask for help because I'm the one that's supposed to know. Whereas, if I ask, hey, how would you do this? Give me some ideas. The community can support you in bringing ideas that you would have never have thought, and much better.
And I feel like you say, we don't ask for help enough, and we
No.
don't actually, it's a lot to admit to yourself that you need help because, we might be, really great at lots of things. I did meet a woman last week on one of our panels who claimed she's never had imposter syndrome.
Oh, wow.
I was blown away by it. She's like, no, I can totally do that.
That's
I can
awesome.
do this.
Good on her.
And I was just blown away. Maybe it's a self-awareness thing. Maybe it's, not because she's gotten through all these great things, sitting back and not realizing she might have had a tweak of it. But yeah, I'll show you her details. She's fantastic and a great mentor to be able to say that to others. I can do this.
It's like any emotion, right? It's how you deal with it. It's how you recognize it and then putting in the tools to be able to overcome it. Like any other emotion that you feel, whether it's anxiety, fear, it's all driven out of the same what's going to happen anxiety. So being able to rein it in and bring tools in place to help, not just for imposter syndrome, but for everything else that you do.
I think, Victoria, you said to me it was around, your many selves and, sort of recognizing that and your internal critic. What's your take on imposter syndrome in your career?
Great comments. I think you've nailed it. So I would I think understanding that, getting into psychology here, is that we don't have one personality. In our minds, there are multiple versions of ourselves, most of us. And one of them is your inner critic. And it's taken me a long time I've named mine. So I'm just like, mine has a name. And she's called Barbara. It's my middle name. I hate it. I'm like, Barbara, shut the fuck up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't swear. But I've also really cultivated my positive narrative. And so when I hear Barbara perking her head up above the parapet, ready to bring me down, I'm very conscious of going, where's the other voice, and how do I bring the other voice to the table? And that I find that really helpful. And the other thing that I've really learned to do, and it comes from, you have to be humble, is when you have imposter syndrome, you do have to go and seek out people and talk about it. And we've talked a lot about, I have a check-in buddy and a mentor, and they're different things. So my check-in buddy is someone who I can just say, can you just talk me off the ledge here about this thing that I want to do or this opportunity, whereas a mentor is much more of a coaching relationship. But you do have to be, learning to listen to the voices in your head. It's really important. Sorry for swearing.
No, that's
I had to emphasise
I'll
the
try and
point.
bleep that out in the recording. I don't know if I'm that technical.
Bloody Barbara. Can't believe I've announced her at a panel at Adobe.
So I really do like that. Giving it a name. Mine doesn't have a name, but I might think of what that could be. Now, anyone else comment on imposter syndrome before I move on? Because I know it's a juicy one. No, we're good. Okay. Yeah. Are you looking at me like no? Okay. So it all comes down to us learning. So there's people realizing this is the tail end of their career. There's some people learning about this in the beginning. It's all about building the foundations and getting ourselves ready. Building up ourselves and building up whoever we might be mentoring to be resilient and to become those future leaders. Dina, I didn't know you were a school teacher previously, so this question might be a little bit strange, but you did actually mention to me that you had teenage daughters of the age where they're trying to figure out, like, what do they do? Like, what do they do in their career? So you did mention to me about, how do we get more women in STEM? So taking it right back, and teaching along the way, how do you think that should play out for the future leaders or entrance into our industry?
I've only got one daughter.
Sorry,
Okay. One's enough. One teenage daughter's enough. I've also got a teenage son. Completely different. So yes, I'm passionate about girls understanding the options around technology from a young age, and because I have the teaching background and I'm in technology now, I'm looking at my daughter's subjects because she's in year 10, looking at her options now, what she's going to study to become after school, and she's selecting her year 11, 12 subjects. And the teachers are just not across all of the opportunities across technology. They don't understand the depth and the breadth of roles that could be offered. And I think, because the pace is changing at such a rapid rate, and because the teachers are probably not always up to speed on the options, I think it's a missed opportunity. So, my daughter's not selected really to go into some of those roles because they're just not, they're not the ones that are promoted. So that is an area. And then I think we also chatted as well about once we get women in technology roles, how do we make sure that we retain them? Because, if they have children, if they go on maternity leave, because of the pace of change in our industry, it's quite hard to come back sometimes. So we've got a lot of initiatives at Deloitte to make sure that we retain good people. And I think, we can always do better, but really we're looking at opportunities around flexible days, flexible working, flexible schedules, holiday leave, just to make sure that we retain amazing talent in the technology space.
And I guess that leads us on to our, how do we retain people? How do we not just create policies, but create actionable policies? It's one thing to have a policy that says, we can decide not to do something, but it's another thing living and breathing those kind of policies. I spent 8 months of last year trying to freeze my eggs, and that was, for anyone who knows about injections and IVF, that's a hard slog. But everybody was so supportive, our partners, our managers. It's not just about, implementing a policy, it's about walking the talk. Touching on motherhood a little bit, I know there's a few parents on the panel. I was going to kick over to Remark because, being a parent, having young children, I think you said at one point, you were thinking of walking away from it all.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Walk me through that experience and how you sort of landed on, when to fold them and when to sort of, raise that, this is what I'm experiencing with your leaders in your group.
Yeah, so similar I had, when I was I was managing a team for Asia Pacific and EMEA out of Sydney. and I was trying to fall pregnant, and miscarriage after miscarriage. I had about 5. But the funny thing is, and I was talking to someone yesterday about this, is that we would just go back to work. I mean, sometimes I would miscarry in the office, and then I'd just go back and manage the team. Or so it was pretty crazy times, and it wasn't. No one made me do it. It wasn't a bad culture. It was my culture. It was my team, but it was more that I felt the responsibility. And if I had to do it again, I would do it very differently. But when I look back, the support that I had was immense. Like, it was just phenomenal, to a point where I called our CEO at the time and I said, look, I'm going to have to quit. I can't do this anymore. This is I'm gonna take some time off. And he was like, no, you're not doing that. Take as much time as you need. Go and call me back in 4 months. And in 4 months, he called me and he said, Remark, how you doing? And I was like, great, I'm doing yoga, I'm eating well, this is amazing. I never want to work again. And he said, well, look, but I said, like, I'm kind of getting a little bit bored. And he goes, well, why don't you, we're building out a team in London. Can you go out and just for fun, go over there? And I did. And, I fell pregnant right before I left, literally the week before. Went over there, did the thing, did what I had to do. And it was amazing. And it turned out really well for me. But it was really difficult. And, I remember when I came back, I had a role at LinkedIn where I managed the Asia Pacific Sales Solutions team. And the number one question I would get from women would be, how do you do it? Like, how do you do it? How do you take the role, but also have children? And I think it really depends on, one, it's hard. Like, I'm not going to make it easy. I think anyone that says it's easy and it's, it's beautiful and it's balanced and it's magical is lying to you. It is not. And, I think getting a lot of head nods over here. But it's, one, the boundaries you set for yourself of what you want. It all starts with you. And then obviously the outside support of having your manager and your team that really support you. And, like saying we're a family, it's not just words, right? It's, you need to back it up with actions, and family takes care of each other. So I think that's really, that was kind of my journey. And now, it's a constant. I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I work with Europe and I work with Canada, and, we do Australia. So it's pretty crazy, but my company is very flexible. And so I get to go to school pickups. I do swimming. I do tennis. But yeah, I still have to make it work around my schedule. So, with COVID, we've had a lot more flexibility in our jobs. Doesn't make it a lot easier because sometimes the lines are a bit blurred. But yeah, anyone that's looking to start a family, I would say, definitely focus on what you want and what the environment is that's going to support you in doing that.
Thank you for sharing that really personal story. I think it sort of,
I don't think we talk enough about it, to be honest. Yeah.
And it's really great to see that it worked out for you in the end, and now you've got little ones at home. I pass the mic down to Scott while we do that. But yeah, I think the point of that story is, like, be open. Don't just throw the toys out of the pram. That's probably my mentality half the time. But, be open, talk to people, talk to your mentor first, talk to someone else in the business. If you're, don't know how to frame it to your manager, like, you just get to that point where you're able to be open. And it doesn't have to be family. It could be anything you're going through in your career. It doesn't have to be limited to motherhood, but it's all about, what are the different ebbs and flows in our lives. These things aren't going to stop. Like, pandemic, obviously, it was a testament to that. So shifting gears a little bit, going to be a little bit more uplifting. So I don't know if anyone's seen the latest Tech Council and Accenture report. We're saying by 2030 in Australia, we're going to have 1.2 million people working in technology, which is about a 76% increase on where we are today in 8 years, right? So that's a very big ramp. Scott, you told me how many decades you've been in tech, but I'm not going to read that out. So you've been in tech a long time. Let's just call it a long time. Given the direction, given the growth, give us your thoughts around what is this diversity piece going to look like overall, your observations, your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost 3 decades now, actually. So yeah, showing your age. I started young. Yeah. Look, I think looking backwards, of course, the tech industry. I started out in software engineering, and it was a heavily male-dominated, male-skewed industry. But it was funny though. I'd completely sort of forgotten about this until I was reflecting on this conversation. When I was about 23, I was working for Havas Digital, and somebody did something crazy there. They decided to make me a team leader. So I had the opportunity to hire my first person, and I hired a female in a heavily male-dominated world. And why did I hire a female? She was the best person for the job. And I think reflecting on that too, when I think about my career in industry has been so heavily male-dominated, but the women that have been in that world have been largely in the top 5% in capability and skill. So, broader questions around, do you have to be exceptional to be in a minority? And does that start to skew the sort of people that it attracts? Is it a bias that sort of builds upon itself? So I think, looking forward in the future, it is definitively something that has to change. And, initiatives like Girls in Tech is brilliant for just that purpose. And I also sort of, reflect on the gender pay gap within the industry as well. So, if we're thinking that the women in the industry are amongst the best performers, then how and why does that pay gap still exist? It's even more sort of nonsensical. So, and I think something Victoria said, she said, looking after your own well-being. And I think that's something that also reflecting that the male guys in the industry tend to do better. They tend to be more aggressive in looking for promotions or remuneration increases, etc. And that's something that it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, really. That's that squeaky wheel mentality that businesses have is something that I think leaders actually need to be very cognizant of and need to correct to, again, just foster more people coming into an industry for all of the right reasons. Yeah.
I think a lot of people in the room, male or female, will be guilty of like having to prove yourself before you actually take it on. So, I often do a lot of these panels and I hear the same thing over and over again. Oh, I thought I had to prove myself. I had more to prove. I had to be, do it first before taking a step up. And I feel, giving that sort of level playing field to everyone up front in that hiring process, and you don't have to prove yourself. You can stick your hand up and do that role. It's part and parcel to what we've been talking about today.
Absolutely. Yep.
Passing over to Dina. So talking on the talent side of things and attracting talent and building great companies and, setting that sort of tone. You actually described to me how you've moved companies a couple of times. A lot of people have. You actually said one of the moves you made was because of a leader or an aspirational leader in that organization, which I think is super important. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience and why that made a massive difference to you in that move?
Yeah, of course. I had, changed roles, but most of my career had been working for large companies, sort of well-known brands. And in this case, I decided to make a change to an independent, not particularly well-known, smaller company. And because of the leader, so really inspirational, dynamic leader, quite controversial in the space, but always had a point of view and was incredibly empowering. And I've been lucky enough to work under some amazing leaders in my career, but I think he stands out because he created a culture that really allowed people to have a strong point of view, and he backed it up with empowering them, to have a voice, to present. At that stage, I was still fairly junior, but he was quite happy for me to present to senior clients and to really have a large role in the organization. So that left a big impression on me. And certainly sort of every move I've made, I've had a look at who leaders are, had a look at who I can learn and grow from, had a look at how authentic their culture is as well, because if they talk about innovation, do they really follow that through? Are they prepared to make changes? Are they prepared to sort of listen to their team? So there's some interesting lessons in my career, but some really good advocates and leaders.
Yeah, and it's those aspirational leaders, not just when you're a grad, but when you're in that mid-career marathon, when the gap between yourself and your manager might not be that distant because you're sort of etching your way up. It's like, how do we keep attracting or not losing talent to keep that sort of aspirational leadership as part of the culture? I remember one of my first jobs, I was working at Vodafone, and the CEO, his name was Russell, he had this sort of thing where for all inductees, and Vodacom was a massive company. You got invited to coffee with Russ. There might have been like 10 of you at the time, but he sat down with every single person that came into that business. You know, it's only 15 minutes and sort of led people through, you know, his aspiration for the, you know, the business at the time. Pre-network collapse, different organization, but it was great. It was inspiring, and it sort of kept people that weren't grads, you know, in the fold of what is happening. Now, we talked a little bit about volunteering and giving back. So, you know, there's aspirational leadership. There's also taking on yourself. Talking to Ramak, you actually talked about the programs you're involved in and how you're giving back now that you are a leader, and you can sort of take, you know, the flip side of that approach. So did you want to share some of those programs?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, you know, for all of us, I'm pretty sure we're all part of the mentorship programs and supporting women. But for me particularly, I mean, my background is from Iran. I'm Iranian, and there's a lot of stuff happening in Iran at the moment. So, you know, basic human rights, basic, you know, things that we take for granted of having our hair out and being able to function normally, you know, women in Iran are not able to do. So we're actually using tech, we're creating the first NFT, digital NFT for women life freedom in Iran, and we'll be transferring those crypto funds over to Iran to support a lot of the women out there. And I think it's a really good example of, you know, yes, we want to help women here locally. We want to help, you know, mentor women. We want to help bring them up. A lot of the conversations I have with women in my network, whether they're marketing, sales, mid-manager, moving up, is having the confidence to ask what they need. The women in Iran, they can't ask. They have no voice. So we're supporting them in that realm as well. But yeah, that's anyone that's interested, you can have a chat with me after. Little plug. But yeah, we're very lucky. I know we have a long way to go here. There's a big gender pay gap. There's a lot of things that we need to do for diversity in terms of, particularly in tech. But, you know, we're still way ahead of the world. And I think, you know, we need to help others as much as we can.
And I think it's great to see like tech being used for the greater good, whether it's in your role in your business or, you know, you're volunteering outside of your business. Like, how can you give back? How can you take the skills and the knowledge? And everybody in this room can be a mentor. It doesn't matter where you are in your career.
Yeah.
There's always someone that can learn from you. There's a lot of, I think they call them reverse mentorships now, where you have grads mentoring senior leaders, which is quite cool.
Another point on that is that I've learned so much about crypto, blockchain, Web3, you know, things that I really, my head couldn't get around. But I've learned it doing volunteering, doing something that I'm really passionate about. So, you know, it doesn't have, like what Katrina was saying, continuously learning, it doesn't have to be in your job, right? Like, you can find ways to really upskill yourself in ways that you're really passionate about. It might not be a product that you're selling in your company. It might be people that you want to help or support, or building communities that you want to support. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
The girls in tech, you know, giving back through communities like ours. There's lots of, you know, NFTs similar to what we do. Some are really niche, like, you know, girls who code and things like that. But getting involved in communities, you don't know where to start, come to someone like us and we can sort of point you in the right direction. You know, approaching people on our panel. Thank you guys so much for actually sharing your stories. That's really important. So being able to get out there and do something and give back. Sometimes we don't know how or where to start. So by all means, come and talk to us. And I'm sure everyone on this panel has participated in things like that. So this is my last question. This is my last one. For Victoria, to wrap us up, you kicked us off, you're wrapping us up. It's not all gleamy as we've sort of covered. There's some ups, there's some downs. And sometimes we have to have difficult conversations. And some of those conversations have to be, you know, with ourselves, with our teams, with our peers. Thinking about the future, you know, it's uncertain, it's unsettling, you know, all these layoffs, but there's also all these positive changes with the growth of our industry. So any words of advice about overcoming that sort of unknown challenges, given that we're here talking about the future?
Thank you. I think that learning to live with ambiguity is such a, like, it's a, you know, we've talked about muscles you need to build. That is a really important one in the future. You need to be able to do something and not know all the answers and just lean into it and learn. But I think when we spoke, we talked a lot about, so you have to be prepared to fail. And being prepared to fail is really, again, it takes humility. It takes awareness. I think so much in technology, I can give you a million examples of apps I've built for brands or environments I've built or websites I've built when nobody came, and then other ones that have been hugely successful. And so, it's a bit of a cliche in tech because people talk a lot about failing fast, but I do think it's a really important thing. And being able to put your hand up and go to someone and say, you know what, we've invested X in this, we've put 2 million into this, and I don't think it's quite going where I want it to go. Can we get a group of people together and actually talk about how we get this back on track? Can we do some more customer listening? How do we get voice of customer at the table? And then it's okay because you've been really candid and open about the fact that the initiative that you're working on isn't necessarily going in the way that you want it to. And I just think that is a really important skill. So I thought it would be good to end on the Theodore Roosevelt quote, which is kind of a little bit overused, but I think it's so important. The credit belongs to the woman who is in the arena. Her face is marred by sweat and blood, who at worst, if she fails, at least fails daring greatly.
Thank you. And thank you to all our panelists. Big round of applause. Is there anyone in the audience that has a burning question they would like to ask? Probably have time for maybe 2 to 3 most. Okay, well then that's a wrap. Guys, we can mingle, I think I called it, mingle all the way. We're in the festive season, so please have some snacks. And also Karen's in the corner with Girls in Tech merch. If you want to talk to us more about getting your company involved, please come and talk to us. And another big round of applause for our panelists.